other interesting questions that was asked out there was, will we ever see weapons that augment specific skills? Now, this is a discussion that we've had several times here on the show. And basically the response that they gave is that they don't want a specific skill to become so necessary or critical that a player would be considered second rate if they don't have the item. And they cite haste as an example, which I really...
And they're not wrong.
You know what? They're not wrong, but I don't think that they understood the spirit of the question.
Right.
I don't think that somebody's asking for another stat to be added to gear. I think that person was asking about rewards other than just a shiny piece of relevant gear at the end of it.
Plus, there are a few ways to, I think, alleviate this concern. All right. First of all, when you look currently at the fact that there's not really any like mid-core, that it's all casual content and hardcore content, that I don't think that, obviously it will happen, I'm not saying that it won't happen at all, but I don't think it's going to happen as much to where you're going to get someone who is being refused into a group because they don't have the quote-unquote, top tier weapon, right? Like, for example, if you're in one of those like bleeding edge progression raids, or if you're even, I would say, at Nika's level, you're going to be working to get that weapon. You're going to have it in a pretty timely manner, weapon or armor or whatever has the trait on it, right?
Right.
Secondly, if you make it so that it's widely available, don't put it behind an extreme clear or something. Put it to where it's casually acceptable to get. Then you're not going to have that problem, because there shouldn't be an excuse, or there won't be an excuse for not having it.
See,
right?
I almost feel the opposite, though. I feel like if you make it so hard to get that barely anyone has it, people can't require it because no one's going to have it.
They will, though.
And then that way, if they come out and say that when they balance the raids, if they do not at all take into consideration those ultimate weapons, and they say this is meant to be cleared, and it was balanced with people who do not have these weapons, and that way the rare minority 1% of people who get this item are just a bonus on top, and they're not required because barely anybody has it in the first place.
I call bullshit on that, because they say they don't balance raids around healer DPS, and
Well,
yeah, but that's for if you want to clear it like before their intended eye level, which is obviously like way higher than what you can get each week due to tome cap outs.
Well, and I think it also comes down to what exactly they're talking about, what augmented skill they're talking about putting on there. They mentioned haste, which was so needed and overpowered in 11. Like, if they're more careful about making the stat that they put on it, haste, there was no comparison.
But I think the spirit of the question was asking more about stuff like we've suggested in the past, where you finish the relic quest line and you get an additional skill or a skill boost,
I think
a
a
trait.
weapon skill would be cool.
Yeah, and I think, and they didn't address that at all, and I think that got lost somewhere in the translation. I think that's what the person asking the question meant. And I'm not sure that it ever got really to
when
Yoshi.
We brought this up on various episodes, and we brought it up for a variety of reasons. I think that one of the reasons that Nero wants it is because that's something that will add that new kind of incentive to certain things. Something unique and gear lusty. Right?
Well, not exactly, but I mean, like, think about what do you think the percentage of players were that completed a 2.0 relic, like all the way to the Nexus or Novus or whatever? A lot of people did, right? So, and if you were to go back and do all of that work now, it's actually a fraction of the work, because they've eased the item requirements. They've eased, because of the level cap, a lot of the challenge has eased out of it, and so it's not a challenge. It's not even that much of a grind anymore. So because you have that, attaching some kind of weapon skill or trait gives people a reason to do it and continue to do it and work on it and finish those weapons, instead of them just being a way to skip a step in the new progression pattern.
One of the other reasons that we brought up something like this wasn't just like on the relic thing, but look at the wider use that you could get out of this. We talk about wanting to be able to like customize the way that we play as individual jobs to different metrics, right? So instead of just coming out like with one weapon or one piece of armor here or there for each class that augments one of your good abilities, instead come up with what we said in a previous episode, where like take something like Diadem, where you could put 5 or 6 different materias on the Bible list using the spoils, right? They could cost 50 or 60 spoils, whatever, but they're available to everyone, and they augment something that's more like a quality of life type thing.
That's
right?
and that's why I said make it a binary choice. Make it a choice
Yes.
between two different options. That way, like there are players who will be lazy and won't do it, and then you're right, that sets them at a bit of a disadvantage. But I don't know.
Someone in the chat said, well, people already, and I think that they're using this as an example of why they shouldn't do this.
Okay.
That people are already kept out of raids based on gear. You're absolutely right. And you know what that is? They're kept out of raids because either they don't have the time to get better gear, or they're too lazy, or they just don't want to do it.
That's basic eye level and like damage output though. Like someone else mentioned, and this was a good example, that in 11 nobody required you to have a relic or a riddle in order to be in their party because they were so fucking rare. You could not require people to have it. And I think making a weapon in this game so rare that like 5 people had it, nobody would require you to have it.
And see, this is what I was talking about by having a weapon that is completely upgradable right at the beginning of the patch, where you make the requirements for it, you make the grind for it so outrageously long and ridiculous that seeing an overpowered weapon is a very rare thing. It would be an insanely rare thing, and you would look at that person like, oh my god, what kind of like poop sock life do you have?
Right, and that way it would be a bonus to any content rather than a necessity.
Exactly, and then that way, as patches come out, the amount of grinding that you have to do is eased over time. That way, someone can fast forward a little bit, and yes, you know what? That's going to affect the balance of some of the PvE stuff. It is. It just fucking is, and there's no way around that. Mm-hmm. But if you put it out in low, like if there's such a low output of it that only 1 to 5% of your entire community has one of these items, it gives a goal that everyone can keep working toward. That, like, I mean, think about that. Like, even you'd see someone who has a relic like 3 stages above yours and be like, fucking wow,
that would be awesome,
and it would be great.
And the thing too is, you don't have to pick one or other idea. Make on like this whatever this relic weapon is. Let's say for the sake of argument, is a relic weapon, right? Like for the ninja one, your trick attack now lasts 5 seconds longer, right?
Right.
That'd be fucking insane. And as a ninja, you would want that. But if the requirements for it are so fucking high that it's nearly impossible to get unless you're one of these bleeding edge people, that's fine.
Right.
But then you could also include smaller materia that, for example, puts 2 seconds onto the dancing edge debuff, or as a Dark Knight puts another 2 seconds onto Living Dead. Small things like this that aren't required and that aren't going to necessarily change DPS all that much. But as a player, if you get it and slot it into your gear, you're going to notice a difference.
And the thing is that if you provide enough options for your player community and give them a range of things to choose from, it's going to prevent that pigeonholing that they're so concerned about.
Right. And also
they have to make sure that the things are all equal in value, though, because if people are like, okay, you're a paladin and you have these 4 choices, but the player base as a whole decides that if you're a paladin and you pick anything other than this one, then you're loser.
But that's why they can't be, or they shouldn't be as much damage dependent, because I think that's where the line is drawn. If something increases your DPS, that's what you have to take.
Trick attack would be a bad one.
Well, because a trick attack would be on the weapon at the end. That's something that you really fucking want. The other things that you could get easily, like through doing like Diadem or Beastman dailies, those ones would be more arbitrary and just provide quality of life changes.
I mean, I think that's a pretty good suggestion right there.
Also, they wouldn't be able to, I think that in PvP they should be void.
But Nika, wasn't there that time where we woke up from the 1.0 to 2.0 transition and people didn't really know. They didn't really understand, like that tanks wanted to stack crit and determination. It took a while, like with people screwing around with parry to see what kind of returns that got to figure out that that's a bogus stat.
When 2.0 launched, I don't even know. Like Warrior was weird, and Warrior was pretty much as broad as DPS because nobody tanked with Warriors. It was a very weird day when 2.0 launched.
Yeah, and the thing is that like if you introduce a system like this where you're augmenting weapons weapon skills or you're augmenting job abilities, then you have to do it in mass. You have to do it in a way that augments all of the jobs and as you said, somewhat equally, so that you don't. You at some point you're going to have a locking down of like, this is probably the best stat allocation, but for a while people are going to play around with it, and you never, there's multiple situations that you get into, and if you can specialize your job for, say, as a paladin, you could absorb more damage than other paladins because you're stacked up on damage absorption. Stuff like that. Or, I think that those are ways that you could do it. And yes, it's going to take some time to shake out, and people are going to find the most effective ones. But if you make it a range of options, if you give players a range of options, it's going to take more time, and it's going to take more meta discussion. And I think that that's a good thing.
Another thing to keep in mind, too, is that as the game goes on, things constantly change. I mean, take a look at the fact that through a lot of Gordius, what tank was not wanted because there was such a high DPS check, Nika? Was Paladin, right? People, they wanted warriors. But you mentioned there was a time back in Coil when there was one Coil where the damage output was so fucking high, you wanted Paladins. You did not want warriors.
Yeah.
So it's not, so even if the community does decide, oh, well, you have to have these materia traits, you can't have the other ones, that's going to change at some point. And especially with the fact that this whole, that we haven't talked about yet, but the Palace of the Dead comes out, right? Now that you have a more solo or casual, low man-centered content, you're going to have a lot more room yourself to also sit here and play around with this that players enjoy and want to play is part of it. Now, back in Final Fantasy XI, when we did this, I might not have had that opinion because they were so closed off about communicating with people. It's like, look, it's their game. We're going to play it as they intend to play it. But obviously, they've shown that they're...
Got to find with it, too, because just on a smaller scale, what's best in A5 Savage may not be what's best in A6 Savage.
And honestly, the excuse they gave, which was, it'll be hard to balance, I find is really weak because essentially what you're saying is, but then we'll have to try really hard at our job.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. You're right. It probably will be hard to balance, but balancing the game and providing a game that players enjoy and want to play is part of it. Now, back in Final Fantasy XI, when we did this, I might not have had that opinion because they were so closed off about communicating with people. It's like, look, it's their game. We're going to play it as they intend to play it. But obviously, they've shown that they are open to discussions. They want to know what we as players want, and they want, at least in some capacity, to give us that. And this is something that is going to... it'll change the face of the game in a way that we will still recognize it, but everyone will be fucking ecstatic about it. Even the naysayers and the haters beforehand eventually will get on board about it. So if your whole thing is, it'll be hard to balance, I don't fucking care. Make it happen.
To me, the reward system is lackluster and could be a whole lot better. And there's ways that they can improve on that, and hopefully they're going to take some of the suggestions to heart for 4.0. I know that they've planned a lot of their content ahead of time, but they've also been remarkably responsive to listener and player feedback. So hopefully they're going to continue to take that into account.